Good morning.
Good morning.
We are on our final week of our History of Hymn series, and we are looking back just really quick as a recap of what we've done. We have talked about "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues," where Charles Wesley, one of our founders of this Methodist movement, had an incredible transformation. We talked about "It Is Well With My Soul," where Horatio Spafford had a courageous effort to cling to hope despite terrible tragedy in his life. Last week was "How Great Thou Art." Started off with a simple prayer through a thunderstorm and then an awakening afterwards. It was really interesting because I preached on how great thou art and talked about the macro God and the micro God, the big God, the God in the small invisible pieces of the world. And the bishop of our conference preached on that exact hymn in a similar format. And it was just really nice. It's nice to hear how that and many hymns touch people continuously through all different generations. And today we come to a close on this series with a hymn that is infamous, if you will. It is Amazing Grace. And a lot of you who walked through the door this morning said, "This is my favorite hymn. This is my hymn. When I think of a hymn, this is it." And I actually think that's what makes this such a powerful song, is that you're not the only one. And it's not just in Christian communities. This is a hymn, a song that is known through many different sects of life, non-Christian and Christian alike. This is a hymn that molds itself to exactly what you need. You need empowerment, you'll find it. You need comfort, solidarity, stability, graciousness. You need just a moment of peace. You need to feel seen in the dark depths of your season. This song reaches in and it finds you there. It has a universal message, but it has a really difficult upbringing. The story as to how we got here is, of course, not riddled with flowers and roses and good, happy thoughts, as none of these have been. So we're going to jump into it because there's a lot of it that I'm sharing about it. Starts with a man named John Newton, born in 1725. Lost his mother when he was 6 years old, and a loss that fractured him really early on. By the age of 11, his father took him to sea and exposed him to the very unforgiving world of being on a boat. At a young age, Newton wasn't just impatient and angry. He was around sailors who were also impatient and angry, but he was also rebellious, deliberately, fiercely rebellious. When I was writing this, I kept thinking, was I ever really rebellious as a teenager? Anyone else? I heard it, yes. If you are a teenager, do your parents a favor and not be rebellious. But he despised authority, as many of us do. When we're told what to do, we don't like it. We want to be the ones in charge of the authority. So, this very angry teenager, he was on 6 sea voyages with his father, and the rebellion caught up to him, and he was pressed into service. Back in the 1700s, the British Royal Navy didn't just ask for volunteers, they swooped you up. They came in, and they were called press gangs. And they would arrive, and they would roam the port towns, and they would legally kidnap able-bodied men to serve in the military. And John Newton was one of them. Now he was the property of the king. Hate authority, go serve under the authority. He was a disaster in the military. He did not like strict military discipline, and so he did something called, he deserted the military, which many of us know means you run away. And when you do that, it's a capital crime, at least in the 18th century. So he was hunted down, captured like a criminal, and then he was publicly flogged. Oh, who does that sound like?
Jesus.
Interesting. Whipped in front of a whole crew, demoted to the lowest ranking. You hear it in the Good Friday story. He was reduced from a promising young man to a disgraced, bitter outcast. Okay, so far so good. Having a really rough start. Doesn't get better, not for a while. To get away from the Navy ship where he was completely disgraced, he managed to get himself transferred to a merchant slave ship bound for West Africa. He wanted to be as far away from the British authority as possible, but things went bad to worse on that slave ship. Once they hit the coast of Africa, Newton did not, surprisingly, get along with the crew. And the local slave trader by the name of Amos Clow, in a poetic act of twisted justice, Clow turned on Newton. And they locked him up and starved him. Okay, still gets worse. I don't know how. Even at his lowest, remained stone cold hearted. So he was finally rescued in 1747 by a captain of a Liverpool ship called the Greyhound, where he, of course, was the most cynical man on board. He didn't just reject faith, he mocked it. He spent long hours inventing new creative ways to blasphemize God. He was vulgar. He created songs that ridiculed the ship captain. Man, he was just a difficult human to be around. And of course, it wasn't until March 9th, 1748. What happened, do you think, to that ship that jolted him awake and maybe had a spiritual awakening?
Big old storm.
A what?
Big old storm.
A storm. Who else experienced a storm and was transformed?
It is well with my soul, guy.
Did you say Israel?
I said, it is well with my soul.
It is well with my soul. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. So, Horatio Spafford. We also know John Wesley experienced this. We also know that Karl Boberg, who wrote How Great Thou Art, experienced a storm. I feel like God has something going on here. God knows that through water we are transformed. Maybe it's not easy and maybe it's really rocky, but there is something about storms that jolt us awake. We may not find ourselves in physical storms here in California, but there are absolutely personal storms that we go through that jolt us awake, that rip us out of whatever reality we find ourselves in, because sometimes that's the exact reality hit we need. We're so in depth of whatever it is we're in that we need something to jolt us out of it, to literally spit us out. You never see it coming. Just like they did with this storm, it descended so fast they never saw it coming. It slammed into their ship, ripped open the timbers, the whole boat flooded. The storm had to have been terrifying. And when people are scared, who do they reach out to? God. Even the most cynical people, God is there. He began, Newton, to think about the books he was reading, think about the prayers his mother taught him, think about the woman he loved that was still back at home. He thought of a faith that he didn't really understand or just shoved aside. But that night changed him. That voyage started to, you know, when a little seed starts to plant roots, they're not very deep, but they're still there. He had little roots growing. But it doesn't end there. And he wasn't a Christian right away. In fact, later in 1754, Newton became the captain of his own slave ship, believing that slave trade was a respectable and accepted practice. He did this 4 years after that moment in the sea. Now think about this very tragic juxtaposition in this moment. A complete collision of two realities that do not belong together. A man who was commanding slave ships, viewed as live cargo, was now the same man who is having a slave ship who is viewing people as human cargo. It is just interesting that though he was enslaved himself and knows what it's like, he still went forward and did this. It's interesting that this comes up now just 2 days after Juneteenth occurred, because there's nothing okay about slavery. There is no just slavery. It's an act of horrific systemic injustice rooted in a very horrible mindset that someone is lower than another. A mindset that still fractures us in this world today. I'm not condoning Newton's complicity to human trafficking. I am not saying that his slave ship was a good thing, but it does help him grow his roots, and here's why. So no slavery, do not like it, do not want it, but here's how God works in very mysterious ways. We have to wrestle with the uncomfortable reality that to fix a broken human soul, you sometimes have to keep breaking it to a point where it has no more brokenness. Newton's transformation, like all of us, his is not sudden. It's not a magic switch you can just turn on and off. Grace is a very long rope. It is a very stretchy rubber band is what I think grace is sometimes. Grace is years and years of confronting the hard stuff so that we can see with clear eyes. Grace is not a storm that knocks you out. Grace is that constant that takes you with every wave. He was blind to his own hypocrisy and the culture around him. He was a heart deeply compromised, but that Spirit started watering that seed. And a change started to flicker. He began to study the gospel, spent years with Scripture, seeking the real Jesus. And all of this helped him see that I am not doing a good thing here. Even with compassion and decency and treating slaves with kindness, those still don't work together. And it was unheard of a slave captain to treat anyone with kindness. But he began to look at these people on his ship who he deemed lower than himself, he deemed as mere commodities at one point, and he saw their humanity. Was that enough? No, absolutely not enough. True justice demands a far different end. It's called the breaking the chains. But here we're witnessing the agonizing change of what God can do. The massive amount of spiritual strength it takes to go from that kind of life into what he changes into, and you'll see in just a second, is spectacularly miraculous. He came to know Jesus so deeply that he could no longer tolerate the cruelty of his own life. So he gave up the sea slave trade forever. And in the next decade, he made God his priority. And in fact, he was so transformative that he became a pastor just a decade later. I went to school and seminary, and I had a lot of people who were second career pastors. It is fascinating. When people decide to become a pastor in their second career, I always ask why. Like, why on earth would this be your choice? But it's often because God's grace is working tirelessly for years and years and pulls them out of something and opens their eyes. Newton was a little more, what's the word I want? Bigger. A little less justice in his life. But he found God, and God changed him. So when he stood up in the pulpits in England, he wasn't preaching that cheap grace, that, oh, you make a mistake, you just pray to God, move on with your life. He was preaching of radical transformation. He had a church so full that it had to be enlarged so that people could come and hear him. And so for his congregation to really understand this radical grace that God gives, he was writing hymns to go along with his sermons. Nearly 300 hymns have been written by John Newton, the ex-slave trader. And on a New Year's Day sermon in January 1773, he wrote the words that we know. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Right? You could sing that whole verse. Saved a wretch like me. Now, we think we're wretched. Compare yourself to Newton, I think you're an angel, and you're probably a saint. He was lost, and then he was found. He absolutely was blind, and now he could see. And they weren't written to be flowery religious poetry. They were written as a raw confession because it took years, tragic amount of years, to dismantle Newton's pride and his culture and his worldviews to see the horrifying reality in front of him. Grace is a weird thing because we don't understand it fully. But it breaks through our pride and it teaches our hearts to face the truth. It immediately brings comfort. We are the ones that are resistant to change. God is already about the change, about the justice, about the love and the compassion. We are the ones that are wearing covers over our faces to not see what's happening in front of us, to make it okay, whatever it is. Pick any of the isms. We have the problem of not letting the grace transform us. We're hardened in our hearts because what's on the other side is also really scary. Vulnerability, tireless, thankless work of doing justice, loving people and your neighbors. This story is one of someone who says no to their failures in their past and makes a change and goes forward in God. He wrote a song that has changed and touched billions of people. That famous 6th verse that we'll sing today, when we've been there 10,000 years, appears inside of the 1852 Harriet Beecher Stowe's anti-slavery novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Huh? Interesting full circle. It's used now as a song of resistance and survival and strength, and it has been part of the abolitionist movement in America for years. And now today at the end of service, we're going to sing about Chris Tomlin, who added, "My chains are gone, I've been set free." Again, the imagery here is deep. So what does this mean for us today? Well, I hope you know that God's grace A is real. B exists here, and C exists for you. It's that free gift that we are given, but we need to accept it. It took Newton a long time going through terrible, heinous things to figure out that grace was real for him. Where is grace in your life? How has it saved you? How has it given you strength? How has it transformed you? Grace is not something we just throw around and we just hope it sticks to the wall. It's something here, now. It breaks our hearts open so that we can see Jesus. So that we can see the injustices of the world, as painful as they are, and make the change for the better of the world through compassion and love and mercy. Now, if people like Newton can do that, imagine people not like Newton doing that. How much quicker that transition can be. This is not just about us simply transforming. It's about the world transforming. But it starts with you. The relentless, amazing grace that's actively flowing through your actions and your words and your everyday love for others changes the world immensely. So be honest with your own transformation, how grace is playing in your life, the raw moments that you maybe regret that you did, the actions that you once were to the person you now are. Those moments that jolted you awake and have shaken your very being. The moments that have given you strength. All of that is God enveloping you in grace. So let us go out and honor the difficult stories. Honor that all of us have our own stories. And that the power of God's transformative and amazing grace is real, is here, and is available now and forever. Thanks be to God.